everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I think I'd like to start off a vlog. I'm not sure if I'm going to finish any of the books I'll mention today. I'm going to start them and I'm going to do a bunch of things in between that I'd like to document. I've kind of forgotten how to make a vlog, but stick with me if you'd like. The first book I'd like to talk to you about is The Young Benjamin Franklin, Birth of Ingenuity by Nick Bunker. So this book covers Benjamin Franklin's childhood, a little bit of his ancestry. It takes us up to the point where he's 40 years old, because from 40 onwards is kind of when we know a lot more about Ben Franklin from his autobiography and from other texts around the time. I like that the author of this book, Bunker, really does his research on what was going on in England from the late 1600s to pretty much up to the point where Ben Franklin's father leaves England. There's a lot of political turmoil in England and a lot of fights breaking out between different religious groups. I don't know too much about a lot of these religious groups. There's so many subsections between Presbyterians, Quakers, Puritans, and so on, and so many other ones are listed. But he does explain it a lot better than I can. And he also covers kind of his grandfather, his aunts, his great uncles, people who were also equally brilliant and they had a scientific mind. They were wealthy. They knew a lot about a lot of things. So that's kind of his ancestry. And I never processed the fact that Ben Franklin is kind of a first-generation kid of an immigrant parent. And Josiah, his father, absolutely hustled for his children. I recognize the hustle. You know, he took on so many different jobs that maybe some he wasn't even qualified for in any way, but he did whatever he could to support his family. And he then remarried while in Boston to who would eventually become Ben Franklin's mother. He looked up to his older brother James a lot, and again, to kind of touch on Josiah's hustle, he made sure that he was financially setting up his sons for success, so he would invest in whatever it would take to make his sons have a business to begin with. So James really wanted to be a printer, so his father saved as much money as he could to make sure he gets him his first printing press so that he could start off his shop. You do get a beautiful depiction of the way his mother's teaching style was. So she was really in tune with him as a child and let him play a lot. It says here that Franklin, from his father, he acquired the ingenuity of a literate English craftsman. From his brothers and from Boston, the yearning for travel and the sea, but it was his mother who educated his feelings. She gave him a right combination of attachment and liberty and the space for him to play creatively. There are some depictions of women's lives in here that are devastating. Like his great-aunt Hannah is described to have been pregnant 10 times in the span of 20 years, and only 2 of her children made it past infancy. And to kind of substitute myself in this historical time period and picturing being pregnant for like 20 years, and feeling so much of that devastating loss and all of the things. It's just the way he captures some of the voices of women who are not even that much talked about in historical records is kind of admirable, and it really kind of paints a picture of the time. He even kind of situates Ben Franklin in the very beginning in a way that helps, because, you know, he says George Washington, the Adamses, Hancock, and the rest, they're all far younger. Remember, Franklin dies when George Washington is still president, like the first one. It says every day in his childhood in the street, he would still see men that were in the prime of life who had helped to hang the Salem witches. As for Philadelphia, when Franklin first entered the city just at 17, people could still remember a time when settlers lived in caves by the Delaware. I really love the chapter where we explore what Franklin was reading as a child, and the author does an amazing job. So he read a lot of Plutarch's Lives. He was really obsessed with this grammar book from England. He read a lot of Defoe, and he tried to imitate their style of writing many times, and he tried to picture himself being a future writer in some ways, and he was fascinated by some of the poetry and some of the letters. It's a fully packed chapter in here just on what he was reading. And then Silence Dogood, the persona he adopts for being this sassy older lady. I've only heard about the Silence Dogood letters from National Treasure, I don't know if they're talked about more in the States, but I also didn't realize that she was a woman and that she was kind of sexual and devious and gossipy. And the fact that Ben Franklin did this, I mean, how is that not the most Bridgerton lady whistle down thing you've ever heard? Like, the fact that he was that gossip monger in town and just kind of taking shots at the wealthy and people in the community. I just love that about his character. Yeah, so now I'm at the part where he got in trouble for the Silence to Good Letters, as did his brother, and he had to flee, and he moved to Philadelphia. This book is amazing so far. I love it. I love the research. I love the history. It's hard to picture him as a younger man. It really is. I'd like to see a few secondhand bookstores. I might buy a few things. I don't know. But I'm taking you with me, so. getting 3 books. I've had these on my list for a while, so I was really happy to find them in store. So this one is The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady by Edith Holden. I've taken this out from the library in the past and I loved it so much because it's nature journal, so beautifully illustrated, and you kind of have it printed in a way that also shows her handwriting. Another book I've had on my list for a while is Selected Works by Lermontov. This is kind of a vintage copy of his selected works, and it even has kind of illustrations and paintings, and it contains his poetry and any other kind of thoughts or short stories. Some of them are even in color. Both Ukrainian and Russian literature kind of captured this like small town, rural feel that's very Eastern European and special. And then the last book that I got is this vintage copy of The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin by Beatrix Potter. I'm a huge Beatrix Potter fan. I've always wanted to find kind of like a little copy of some of these. They're just so beautifully illustrated and printed, and the size is just perfect. Yeah, I've only gotten these 3. I'm trying not to buy as many books, and if I do, they have to be extra special. I'm trying to be mindful and support local bookstores in the process. This is going to be a short entry. I've just finished reading Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. Back in March, I went to see a play in Toronto. We asked for tickets for Christmas. Like, this is the one thing I really, really wanted, because the 2 actors who played Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were the same actors who played Merry and Pippin in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. And I've never really seen a celebrity before, but also like, how great were they in Lord of the Rings? So I really, really wanted to go see it. And prior to going to the play, I thought, oh, I'm gonna prepare. And my brain just skipped a beat, because instead of putting Rosencrantz and Guildenstern on hold at the library, I ordered Waiting for Godot. And I think it's because in high school, we read those 2 side by side and started talking about them, and my brain just remembers both of them as Waiting for Godot. My husband jokingly said that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is like The Lion King 1.5. Obviously, Tom Stoppard wrote the play first. There is something to this genre of writing where it gives off sort of the same vibes as fan fiction. This play was written a while back, but I remember even studying Middle English and reading a lot of medieval plays that were sort of Bible fan fiction. You had the story of Noah, but it's just like what happens before they get on the ark, and then you have these kind of bickering conversations, and so many like semi or micro plays that were just a reimagining of certain parts of other books. For some reason, reading it feels a lot faster than watching it live, because there's less pauses and intonations, and sometimes your eyes just skip over the same lines over and over again. But I think seeing it in performance, it really drags on, because the characters are in this sort of limbo state of kind of waiting, but also there's repetitive things that keep happening, and you have to watch it, and sitting with it kind of adds this like weird layer of tension for you as an audience member. Now I'm going to move on to the next book and see what happens. I might go out today to look at some artwork, potentially some clay from some artists. If I'm allowed to film, I'll probably take you along with me. So, all right. So I couldn't walk away from the mushroom plant holder. I'm gonna have to put a plant in here that doesn't distract from the beautiful mushrooms on the side. I don't even know how she did this, but it's perfect. It also has one of those holes where you can drain should you need to. I don't know if I'm supposed to put soil in here or plant pot inside of a pot. I'm gonna have to figure it out. I could probably use this for something else as well, but I'll link the artist down below. This is too cute. So it's actually been a few weeks since I started this vlog. I didn't mean it to kind of remain unedited, but I thought I'd sneak this book in because it's left me with such a hangover. I can't describe how much I loved this book. So this is A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. The only way to explain what this book is this like Venn diagram of writing advice, literary criticism and analysis and close reading. Something that only George Saunders can do in the way that he does, and also 19th century Russian literature, often set in kind of a rural area that encompasses kind of a very specific time and place. I have not been able to capture what this book has done for me, even though I've tried. So since reading this book, I actually thought, oh, maybe I still want to listen to someone talk about Russian literature. And I got the audiobook of the Great Courses Plus on Russian Lit. I think I listened to like 16 hours of Russian Lit syllabus. And while that was still beautiful and informative in its own way, it just didn't hit the spot. I then tried to read George Saunders' short stories, and while he's very skilled at writing short stories, and you can see elements of what he talks about in this book, maybe because of the setting or the contemporary nature of his stories or the Americanness, I can't tell what it is, but it still didn't hit the spot. Like this is just such a particular intersection of literature. So I initially wanted to read a story and then pause and reflect, tell you kind of my thoughts and feelings about the story, and then see what George Saunders does with it. But it was a little bit difficult to do because of the structure of some of these essays. So what he does is, in the first short story, which is In the Cart by Anton Chekhov, he actually releases a bit of text and then analysis. It kind of reminds me a little bit of our English teacher who used to pause films during class and then narrate or bring kind of commentary as we went through the film, rather than make you watch it all the way through and then discuss. The first story is the only one that's uniquely kind of presented that way. And then the remaining 6 stories, you get the full story and then you get the analysis. I did prefer the format of that first one because there were a lot of little elements or things that were drawn to your attention, which looking back afterwards is kind of hard. So it's definitely one of those books that you might want to read once or twice. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I prefer to have both the audiobook and follow along in the text. This helps me annotate better, highlight, but also kind of have 2 senses engaged at once. All of the stories are read out loud by professional actors like Nick Offerman, Rainn Wilson, Glenn Close, and then the commentary is done by George Saunders himself, and he has such a perfect voice too. And dare I say, after reading this book, I felt like some of the stories that he selected were not as great as he made them sound. And I know that that's a bit of a stretch, but there was something more beautiful in the way that he discussed these stories and the way he made you pay attention to certain things, and his reading of it that was somewhat more beautiful than I think if I would have gone to these stories on my own. Maybe because I wouldn't know what to pay attention to, or maybe because of the way he just extracts what's essential about these stories, like where they hit the nail on the head. The only story that I have read before encountering this was Master and Man by Tolstoy, and I think I read that in undergrad, and there's no way that I would have even a quarter of the vocabulary that George Saunders has when he discusses it. He makes you pay attention to very different things than I think I would have paid attention as a reader, because he's trying to assess both kind of like what it means, what the story is trying to tell you, but then he kind of examines Tolstoy's craft as a writer. and decomposes it in such a way that you could say, oh, okay, so like this is what he's doing. He even makes you reconsider like what he would have rewritten or maybe taken out. It's made me want to read a lot more Anton Chekhov's short stories. The 2 short stories he selects here from Chekhov, Gooseberries and In the Cart, were probably 2 of my favorites. And Ivan Turgenev's The Singers. So The Singers is this little town where they have a tavern, and there's going to be a singing contest with 3 contestants. And the first one is kind of meh. The second one is beautiful and technically great, but it just doesn't hit quite right. And then the third singer leaves everyone transfixed. It kind of reminds me of that moment where Pippin is singing in Lord of the Rings and everyone just kind of pauses. This town has a moment that is just stuck in time. Everything freezes and you just kind of enjoy this melody, but at the same time it feels otherworldly. There's something magical about this particular moment. We reach this moment first by having a lot of background information on characters, setting, and when George Saunders recaps the story, he goes, what was all that fluff? You know, like, let's talk about why did we need all of that information before we hit that beautiful moment, which was the important message of the story. In Gooseberries by Anton Chekhov, we sort of encounter these 2 characters who are walking and they stop at a lodge, and then this one character has this ecstasy for life all of a sudden, and while it starts raining he takes to swim in the pond, and then he kind of vents at these people about the importance of like life and youth and death impending. There's something both sad and inspiring about his speech, but that's kind of the vibe you get, so that's where the title comes from. The Nose by Gogol is something I would call Kafkaesque prior to Kafka's writing. A man's nose falls off and just starts walking around town, and he's a character of his own. The other one that stood out was The Darling by Anton Chekhov. So The Darling follows a woman who had a very troubled dating history, and each time she sort of clings on to someone in a very obsessive way and becomes them in a way, and you see the way it affects her life. And in this one he sort of looks at patterns with a character, but also patterns in a story, and how in the moment that's kind of the climax or the twist, something changes or is slightly different than before, and why we as readers might want to pay attention to that. One last thing I'll mention is that Saunders knows these texts so well that sometimes he'll look at a story and he'll look at different translations of it and what different translators have said about it in their introductions to their publication of the Russian short stories. Like, he's looked at several texts, he's looked at academic analysis, and he's kind of put it all together, but like, he knows each one of these stories so well. It's in his heart, you know, it's like inked in there like a tattoo. And you can tell just based on how he delivers. You can tell just based on what he chooses to focus on, and sometimes he narrows in on a single word or a single translation. And it makes you also aware of how different translators might affect the text that you're reading when it comes to you from, you know, Russian or French or some other language. Like I said, this book has left a huge kind of hole in my heart, and I am going to try to find similar things. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in a future vlog or video. Bye!